So, hello and welcome back to another Improvement Season podcast. It is me, Pascal Steve. On the other end, it is Steve Hall. And I don't even know how we should move on from the last week's episode, Steve. It was a very well-received one. I very much enjoyed it myself. And I think that people very much enjoyed it as well, just based on the interaction and feedback and also the view count that was unusually high for an Improvement Season podcast. So I don't know where to go from here, Steve.
I think we just need to be replaced by Jeff.
Yes.
Just bring Jeff on every week. Permanent guest, permanent fixer. I haven't actually seen the view count. I am interested. I saw loads of YouTube comments coming through that people were like completely hyped that we had Jeff on. Yeah. So that's really cool. And yeah, it's great. Jeff's super popular, actually, especially on YouTube, I guess. That's like his scene, so that makes sense.
I mean, it's probably because he's Mongolian to, I think it was a 1/3 or so. So his Mongolian.
You have a better memory than me for that.
Mongolian nature.
Yeah, so I don't know where to go either. I will ask you then, how are things? How are things on your end?
Wait a second before we actually then deviate from it. Because someone then also said that we should bring on Alpha Destiny, for example. And we have, of course, our normal ReviveStronger podcast. But the ReviveStronger podcast is most of the time we're bringing on one expert to talk about one specific thing. The Improvement Season podcast is more about just our own personal experiences, what it is that we're going through at the given moment. And I think that it may be then refreshing once in a while to bring on someone else who has been in the fitness industry or is an athlete themselves to talk about their experiences and what they are going through at the moment, instead of bringing them onto the podcast itself. Because someone was asking, like, why did you bring on Jeff for the Improvement Season podcast and not the ReviveStronger podcast? And I haven't yet gotten to that comment to reply to that one. But it is because the Improvement Season podcast is all about the own personal development and experiences, and then talking about that, and not so much about specific, for example, scientific paper talking about that also.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw the Alpha Destiny comment and I was like, who is Alpha Destiny again? And not because I don't know who Alex is, it's because I know of him for some reason. I just know of him as Alex Leonidas. Like that's always kind of, I didn't really come across, I know for a time him and Jeff were like some big names, and then kind of Alpha Destiny, I don't know. I feel like I kind of lost hearing about that so much. I've never really digested a ton of his content until recently. I saw his name coming up more in the last maybe year or so.
Because
and that was then, maybe as he competed, and it was Alex Leonidas. And I think it probably was him competing that drew my attention to him, because I was like, oh, like this guy's going to step on the natural bodybuilding stage. Obviously, this is our interest, and kind of seeing him also on, as I mentioned to you off air, maybe, I don't know if I mentioned it on here, but what have I forgotten? Brains and Gains, Dave McConey's podcast. So I often listen to those guys, and he's had Alex Leonidas on. And I love those sort of chit-chatty episodes with people like you mentioned. They're not an expert. They are maybe a practitioner, like Jeff coaches people, and Alex probably does as well, I'm not sure. But they're also just in the thick of it, and they're around our age. And so I love those conversations, which is why I think the Improvement Season is a better platform for that, where we can have both your perspective, my perspective, and it isn't like a interview, and like you said, it's not going through the science. And sure, we have people maybe come on to the podcast who are like, I don't know, Andrew Chappelle or someone like Alberto Nunez talking about their contest prep, but it's very much coming from like an educator perspective when I'm asking the questions and they're answering them too. It's not just their experience. Whereas when we bring on people who are maybe more like ourselves, we're also educators, of course they are, but they're more on our level of just enjoying the discussion, the back and forth, and I don't know, almost not the pressure of like it's a strict educational expert interview, and it's kind of a different platform. So I like bringing on, that's where, because there's people I want to chat to. I'm sure maybe the same with you, Pascal, we might have the same people in mind, but I feel like this platform would be better for them than bringing them on like the one-on-one podcast, if that makes sense.
100%. And if you really want to categorize it, this is a discussion and a chat, whereas the ReviveStronger podcast is an interview. And I think that this is a perfect way in differentiating those two. And I think that for certain people, it's just better, I think, to just have them on in a chatting kind of fashion.
Yeah. And also, with Jeff in particular, he interacted with us on the improvement season, and we've kind of both spoken to him. So it was kind of like we wanted to, like, that's the platform we'd been chatting on, not on the other, like on that podcast, you know? So it's quite nice to like have that slightly less serious, a bit more laid back kind of discussion. So exactly. I think people will also enjoy that more than maybe the other way. Maybe not, but
for something like this, for chatting, but also for the interviews themselves, I would love to have like a studio. As many high professional podcasters nowadays do it, to get the expert or the interview guest in, fly them in, just sit down and talk with them for like sometimes even, I don't know, 3 hours or so, you know?
Yeah.
That would be so freaking amazing, especially for if you're in a doing a three-way, then I think the dynamic is a little bit hard at times when it comes to talking over Zoom. And I think that everyone can relate to that after the COVID period, where then you had kind of business meetings online. There are 20 people in the same Zoom call and everyone is just talking, and it's so unorganized. And for something like this, it would be lovely to have like a just a studio, sitting down on the couch and just chatting. But what I wanted to also then ask the audience as well, if you enjoy something like this, I'm more than open in bringing people on and just chatting with them about their personal experiences, training, nutrition, because sometimes that is not really what many people do in an interview where you are then touching on one specific topic. And I know for a fact that many people are interested in looking behind the scenes of what is a certain person doing, what has he been doing up to this point, what were some kind of mistakes that they've done, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'll say we did Ask the Athlete before, where it was kind of like you just spoke about there, but it just didn't really go as well as what our discussion did with Jeff. Yeah. And it also didn't go how it would with a like expert interview where we're touching on a topic. So I think we've already tried that kind of one-on-one style, and that kind of, again, interview setup doesn't quite work for those sort of like discussions. Like you said, it's a discussion and a chat. Although I like to phrase that with also the podcast, but it's just, the podcast, the ReviveStronger podcast. Yeah. But I think I like the differentiation between the two for sure. And man, having a studio, especially because I see it sometimes with like, if you look at the roundtable discussions, some people sit back, some people like are more forward in speaking. I'm definitely that person. If I'm like in a 4 or 5 person chat, like I will probably be the person that talks the least, because I'm just like, I don't want to butt in here, I don't want to butt in there, I just don't like, it's not the way I do things. But in person it's much easier because you can gauge those like intangibles that you can't quite get across when you are like this. But man, I've been those high level productions. I was just talking to Greg Potter, who set up his podcast, and he's going to come on. I'm going to interview him this week and we'll discuss his podcast a little bit. And he was like, with him being a perfectionist, it's taking him 10 to 15 hours to do one episode, and he's recording it and like doing the research beforehand, obviously, like I do. And then he's also editing it and putting it together like you do. So I can understand it taking him a long time. Yeah. But I definitely have, particularly recently, felt pressured in that, like, I'm like, man, I actually don't feel like I've had enough time to, like, I definitely understand the topic and I've read the paper or whatever, plenty, but like, if I could have even more time, it would be nice. And if I could give the episode even more time and attention and care, that would be amazing. But man, yeah, with like a full-time like job alongside it, I couldn't give 10 to 15 hours or half that. Maybe that would be too much.
But that's why I think that those professional podcasters do it full time, and they live off the sponsorships as well. Or in particularly, these are the financiers who are paying for the show. It's not necessarily the viewer count. The viewer count, of course, is the basis then to negotiate with the sponsors. But in itself, it becomes a full-time job, and you need a team behind it, right? Yeah. Someone who is collecting then all of the material for you so that you can prepare just for the show and be the host and the moderator, whereas someone else is then doing the recording, sitting there with you, recording everything, keeping track that the entire technology is working and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we are not there, and I don't know, perhaps maybe in the future Probably not so much with the Improving Season podcast, but who knows? For something like the Revive Stronger podcast, it is quite niche though, and that may be an issue.
Yeah, no, it is niche. Maybe we have to broaden it. We can enter different areas, bring on, I don't know, some people who are more, I don't know, generally known for like health and fitness information.
Just for the listener, so that they have an understanding about this, we regularly get some emails from people who may be kind of, I don't know, managers or kind of an agency who are trying then to bring, in quotation marks, like big quotation marks, experts on the podcast, and these are so generic messages that they are sending to you, like, hey, we really love the Revive Stronger podcast. It would be great if that XYZ guest would come on and talk about XYZ topic. And most of the time, if you read through those people, these are kind of snake, what is it called again?
Snake oil salesman.
Exactly. And I always hit the spam button so that Google, I don't know, always puts it then into spam for other people as well. It's so ridiculous.
I get them regularly, and I'm just like, and it's unfortunate, like some people I get reach out who are like, they're just reaching out as a person. But it's like I said before, the guests I bring on are people I really know, and I know their stuff. If you're completely new to me as the host of that, like I need to know you inside out, like, or at least pretty damn well, because I've made, not often, but there's maybe been one or two guests, so I don't feel like I've researched them well enough, or I don't know their content well enough, but I've seen some bits and I'm like, they seem good. They're popular. Let's kind of get them on. They seem to fit the bill. And then in hindsight, I'm like, I don't think that guest probably was the person to bring on. So like it's just not how it works. The host and the podcast itself needs to reach out to the person, not the other way around.
Not only that though, of course there could be some kind of a recommendation from a guest that you have on. We had it often already that someone like Brad Schoenfeld said like, okay, you need to bring on researcher XYZ or so. But if you really think about it and you're bringing on someone that you don't really know, it could very well be that person puts a bad light on the podcast itself because they are talking about things that you don't really think are true. And then you're giving them a platform. And people don't know this, that you may not agree with the things that that person is saying. And that's also a problem that sometimes we've even talked about it just recently with other podcasts that bring on in quotation marks experts who are full of shit actually, and who completely go against what the scientific evidence actually says. And it's then, you could make the argument, it's the obligation of the podcast or the podcast host to do the research. But if you are running this as a business and you don't know a lot about a specific topic, you are kind of relying that the expert is actually an expert, you know? So it is a fine line, I think, between the obligation that a podcast host has and also bringing on experts when in reality you don't really know them and you're running it as a business. It's very, I think, very, very tough and complicated to do it. And if you really want to run it safely, then it is probably more so the way to do it, such as you do.
Yeah, I think with Brad recommending researchers, that I'm fairly comfortable with, because then you just talk through their research paper. It's like, it's a research paper, like not too much can kind of really go off like wrongly there. But I can bring up an example like Coach Kassem. He was, people are asking to have him on way before I actually ended up bringing him on. And not because like I don't think Kassem's a great individual and has lots of value to bring. I just simply didn't know his stuff, and it was very new to me at the time. So I didn't feel confident in bringing him on and being like, I kind of recommend this as a person to learn from. That's essentially the way to look at it. Because I don't think, as the host, I don't agree with everything every single person comes on and says, but I know that they have good intentions and they are pretty evidence-based and what have you. But if I don't know their content at all, it's like it could be very risky just to bring on someone because they're popular, which I can see why people would be wanting to do that for the growth of the podcast. But it's like you said also, it's kind of like, it sounds really cringe to say this, but I like the saying because it's Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And like when they come on the Revive Stronger podcast, it is a kind of stamp of our approval that we think they're a legit individual. And so we have to kind of make sure that we think that before they just kind of come on.
Which doesn't mean, just to put it out there, which doesn't mean that you can't be wrong in a person or what it is that they are saying at that giving time. Could turn out that everything that they've been doing was morally and ethically a little bit questionable maybe, but the truth first comes out a couple of years after, for example. Or what they have been claiming to be the case has been then refuted, like maybe then a couple of times in a couple of years from now. And that then is not your responsibility 5 years later of what that person has then claimed or said back then. It's kind of also the thing with cancel culture nowadays, where it's like that someone is being held liable for what it is that they've said when they were 16 years old.
Yeah.
Man, I did a lot of shit when I was 16 years old, or even younger, or a little bit older as well, right? You change. The culture is changing. The society is changing.
Yeah.
And so are your views as well, right? And that's why holding someone liable for what they said 20 years ago, I think is so problematic, so problematic.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same principle here as well when it comes to you bring on a guest, right, who turned out to, I don't know, be someone like a snail. Man, why do I have
snake oil salesman?
Exactly.
It's all right.
It's not your responsibility 5 years after then to knew it 5 years before.
No. And I mean, that's the beauty with our podcast. Is like a lot of the people coming on are people who are evidence-based, so they're keeping up to date with the research. And by definition, science doesn't give us answers. It just kind of gives you the direction that the answer is moving almost. So like we have to update our kind of thoughts based off new literature that develops. And certainly over 5 years, a lot could come out to change your mind on things. And we've seen that with various things within the industry too. So yeah, I think that was a good discussion.
On another note, of course, you've seen it, Steve. The entire world has seen it. Joe Lindner has passed away here a couple of days ago. And I was even talking to Katie about it because social media at some point, Facebook, such as Instagram as well, is becoming a digital graveyard at some point, if you really think about it. Because so many people pass away over the years and their profiles and accounts still stay up. And we had a couple of people on our podcast already who passed away over the years. And it's crazy then to know or see, go to or visit their profile, see that they've posted something like 1 or 2 days ago, and then they are gone.
Yeah,
it's crazy, right? Because in that giving moment, when they have made the last post, I don't think that anyone would expect to not be around anymore in 2 days.
No, he was only 30, right? He wasn't old at all. Yeah. And he's like, I didn't follow him. I don't know if you followed him, and I didn't really watch his content, but he popped up in my feed all the time.
Yeah.
So he was big in our space. I guess he was like the Ziz of our era in that sense. Like he was that guy.
to be honest, I don't really know a lot about him. Just that he was German and that he had this kind of
freaky chest.
Freaky chest, exactly. Yeah. And that the videos that I've seen from him was something that I didn't really enjoy watching. It's that type of content that doesn't really, I don't know, that I don't really enjoy. Let's put it that way, right? But when I saw and read the news, I was actually quite devastated about it. Even though that I didn't know him, even though that I didn't really like the content that he put out, it was just about people having absolute horrendous takes as to why he passed away. Absolutely horrendous takes. And secondary, it doesn't really matter why he passed away. It's just a sad thing that a 30-year-old passed away, right? Yeah. And of course, you can always make the argument, but there are millions of people passing away on a daily basis, and that's absolutely true, right? But you don't know about these people, and you don't hear about them, and this is just human behavior and the human mind. Right? What it is that you don't see, what it is that is not in your close environment or so, something that you don't really care about. Let's be real here. And even though that I may not know him or so, it was quite it was quite gutting when I read it, where it was like, man, didn't like his stuff, but at the same time, that isn't a justification for liking that someone is passing away or anything like. And I think that there are probably people who are like this, of like, yeah, this fucking bastard, finally, he get what he deserves, that steroid abusing bastard or whatever, right? Because there have been horrendous takes once again.
Yeah, people use these instances for their own agenda, and unfortunately, I could definitely see how it can be used as like a holier than thou natty bodybuilder to be like, see, told you drugs are terrible for you, they kill you. And it's like, man, that's such a bad take when you really don't know what happened, and also like so insincere. Like, have some like empathy for this person and their family, and like the people that loved and cared for this person or followed him and looked up to that person. Because at least from what I could see, he wasn't a snake oil salesman. He was just someone who was out there, like, I guess, posting about like his fitness journey and trying to share some things that he thought was educational and helpful and inspiring. And like, he seemed like a fun-loving, nice person. So yeah, when I saw it, it's, again, I don't follow him. I don't have any like links or ties to him in any way, shape or form, but he's like around our age. He feels close because you see his information, all, like you see his face all over the place, and you still will over the next months, like just his old content even. So yeah, it's a bit crazy. And also to think about the graveyard, like you said, because I still see now and then on YouTube, John Meadows videos, like regularly come through, and I'm just like, oh man, and we're one of the guests who passed away on our podcast. Yeah. So yeah, it's not on the podcast. That would be horrendous. Fuck me. I hope that never happens. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, it's totally weird.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, right? It's freaking scary to think about it, but also at the same time it's kind of lovely, because there are so many things in our life that have become digitalized, and why not a graveyard which captures the person in a much better way than just some kind of random letters and numbers on a gravestone. This way you're really reminded about what type of person that maybe was and all that kind of stuff, and I kind of like it. Even though that it sounds absurd.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking, my head's now jumping to AI and how you could literally make like, I don't know, a digital, like maybe you could go into, what's it called? Virtual reality.
Yeah.
Have like a digitized personality, like of someone who passed away in the past. You could have time with them.
I mean, that's what many people,
grandmother.
Yeah, that's what many people already say will happen in the future. Yeah. That you will be kind of, you will become immortal at some point, because you and an AI can create so much from you with all the information that it has about you, that it can basically create a digitalized form of you, and then you live on as a digital form, which is crazy to think about. And I don't even know whether I like this idea, but it could be just the boomer inside of me that wants people to, or that wants life to be kind of ending at some point, because that is what it makes it special.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, is like, I wouldn't want to be immortal. Like, part of me thinks, yeah, being immortal would be fucking cool, but actually then it would completely morph how I go about life. And like, you wouldn't have, there's no time limit on things, and so you could just become the laziest person ever, maybe. And like, I don't know, it's quite nice having that. It's like having a goal, right? If you don't have a goal and goalposts in front of you, you have nothing to aim and drive yourself for. So if you just have infinity in terms of lifetime, it's like, like I have no reason to do anything today. Yeah. Like, yeah. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, but at the same time, I haven't had anyone who I'm super duper close to, who I like love with all my heart, pass away yet in my life. I've had people I love pass away, but no one who I've been like my grandparents. Yeah, I was not that super close person to them, but like I don't want it ever to happen. My parents pass away, but when they do, I don't know how I feel about the potential to be able to like chat to. I don't know. It just feels so wrong that it's digital versus like a real. But maybe it's enough. Anyway, it's a complete weird discussion to go down.
I'm the same as you, Steve. I never really had to be confronted with that. Of course, people passed away around me, but never people that were super close to me. And just to bring it one step further, if I were to just imagine that my son is passing away and I had a digitalized form of him, it would even destroy me much more, because I would constantly be reminded that this isn't real. I can't hug him. And even if we were to be in a future where then this could be replicated, right? The sensation that you're feeling, I still knew inside my brain that this isn't real. And that would destroy me, because each and every single day I would be reminded about it, and I could never really find closure and stuff, you know? Yeah. So you're basically going through an self-induced cycle of devastation and pain.
And that's, I guess you could bring that back to the digital graveyard. Like, maybe some people never get closure because they see the profile there and they're tempted to go back. It's like an X. You maybe have to block and delete them to never look back and be like, oh, I love that person. Like, I'm going to sneak back and look at them. No, you need to get them, like you said, you need that closure and out of your life.
Yeah. Very deep talk here.
Yeah.
Maybe this is what we needed after the episode with Jeff.
Yeah. I don't even know how we got here, but we have.
Let's take a short break and then be back with a little bit more positive things about training and nutrition. Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at ReviveStronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With ReviveStronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger. So here we are, back again. Steve, you've been telling me that you are still feeling trash at the moment. So what's going on?
I think it's you can't outsmart your body. That's what I've learned. You can't. Like, people talk about, I don't know, and I'm that person that is always like, if I'm ill, I have to be fucking ill to not go to the gym, or if I'm injured, I have to be like a broken leg not to try and train around it. Like, I will push myself past the point of which it's worth doing so, and it's just the way I am. I think you're the same with that too.
I'm just nodding and I'm just like, yeah, that's me.
And I think, like, again, we despite ourselves for it, but I think there's some positives that come with that and allow us to push through certain barriers and things. And yeah, that I think is what I did here, where I just ended up the last 2 weeks of my training, every day I was waking up feeling tired, exhausted, not motivated to train, but just went through my training. And I could perform, but you know when you perform but it doesn't feel great, like you don't feel fresh, it doesn't feel good. You finish a session, just even halfway through the session, you're a bit like flat and deflated. That's kind of what the last 2 weeks felt like for me. And I was still, like I said, I could perform, it just didn't feel like I was getting that good feedback from training, and and through the day I was just feeling tired. So then that was probably compounded to then getting 2 days stabbed with a needle, well, slightly stabbed with the tattoos. And that's obviously a really stressful thing to do on the body as well. And so, and your sleep isn't as good. I was sleeping in a different location. And so I just still today, I went to the gym yesterday and did a really light full body deloady style session just to see if that would help. But today I still am like, man, fuck the gym. I need to sleep. I still feel tired. And today would have been 5 days, like since Thursday was the last time I trained. So yeah, I paid the price for pushing my body into a really big hole. And I think people talk about, oh, overtraining is a myth, or like fatigue is a myth, or just eat more, sleep more, whatever. It's like, you have to take care of these things. And yeah, I've learned from it though. Like, I think you sometimes have to push to the cliff edge and even go over it. Like, you have to fail to know what failure is and how away from failure is. And yeah, now I know that I still need to take like proper deloads and need to take care of fatigue management, and that, I'm not superhuman. So yeah, it's been a good lesson actually.
Exactly. I think that this is where anecdotal evidence for you personally, your own experiences of what it felt like, what what you've experienced, how it came to be, is then paying off for you as a coach, but also then as an athlete in the future as well. And I think it has only positive sides to it, even though that in the given moment, it feels like a negative experience. Yeah. If you've never pushed there and you are just making assumptions, then you are ending up in just like, yeah, no, don't do this because I don't know, because I've heard it somewhere. Someone else was saying this, right? But now you kind of know how far you can push yourself, and you can then perhaps even extrapolate that with your athletes as well.
Yeah, it's been good because my philosophy previously was always like, if a deload's like always siding on slightly caution. So like if a deload's a little bit longer than 7 days, then like just take the extra recovery and potentially resensitization if that was possible. And then my views on it were slightly changing where I was like, oh man, am I giving my athletes too much recovery, too much rest? And now I'm kind of like, and this is where I boil down to with everything we're learning about like RARs and volume. And it's like, there is no way you can like trick the body. Like you either have to train really hard but less, or train a bit less hard but with more. And it's like if you take less recovery time, eventually it's going to catch up to you. So if you do take, say, week-long deloads, maybe at the start of a macro cycle, you don't need a week-long deload for those first mesos, but maybe that allows you to train for longer totally because you had so much extra recovery. Whereas if you shorten them at the start, then that fatigue you don't reduce that fatigue as much, so it accumulates further, and then you eventually have to take even more time off. Like here, I'm almost like a week through the deload, and normally at this time, 5 days since like basically training, I would feel like eager to get into the gym big time. Whereas now I'm still like, man, I don't know, I could do with not training again. So I just think people try and almost outsmart the body sometimes. It's like, no. There's loads of methods. Like eventually they almost, and I don't like this thought process because I like the idea of like optimizing and figuring things out. But like there's many roads to the same place, and like you just have to pick your poison. You're probably not going to outsmart someone else by trying to go down a different route. And if you are, it's so marginal, you won't even know if you were able to do it or not.
Yeah. And it's basically also coming back to what we've discussed with Jeff as well, where I even said that having a structure is good to orientate yourself throughout a mesocycle and also macro cycle, but following it to the T, always knowing that 5-to-1 paradigm is what works for you, doesn't do it, because there are so many things that you don't have full insight about and can't control even, that it makes it redundant to think about like, okay, my mesocycle has to be 5 weeks because 7 out of 10 times it has always worked for me. So there are so many things going on deep down inside of you that you don't even feel at times, and then it hits you. And that's why I think the more experienced you are, the more flexible you can be, and the more you can truly listen to your body. And the less experienced you are, the more you want to follow a set structure to actually then learn those biofeedback markers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and something I was also wondering was, whilst that 2 week period where I was able to still perform okay, but training didn't feel good and I just felt like I was very fatigued, in my mind, I'm like, that surely still needs to be productive training because it was sufficient volume and sufficient intensity, of course, and it was good performance. But was the stimulus that I was getting for the extra fatigue cost worth that training? Like, I don't know where I land with it, because I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, where like if someone's just almost like they're just about eking up performance, but it's almost maintaining and they feel very tired and fatigued. Like, I'm like, I don't know if the cost versus benefit is there for that style of training.
I mean, this would only go by gut feeling, and also my assumption. And that isn't worth anything, to be honest, right? Where it's the same as what it is that we've discussed in the past. What would be better of doing like a 3-to-1 paradigm, 4-to-1 paradigm, 5-to-1 paradigm? I think over years, you couldn't really tell, because eventually you will probably get to the same outcome, right? Even though that people are always saying, but what if it gives me 5% or so, right? You could never really tell. I think that the gains towards the end of your lifting career are so marginal that you would probably maybe have a little bit of a head start when you're doing things absolutely correct, but the gap will then shrink again towards the latter end of your lifting career. That's just my assumption. And then in the end, if you're then faced with a situation such as yours, I think that towards the tail end of your lifting career, it wouldn't really make that much of a difference. I think
it's kind of like, do you want to go harder for less time or less hard for more time?
Yeah, exactly.
You're probably going to reach the same outcome with both. It's like,
at least very, very similar outcomes that are barely noticeable for the outside observer.
It's kind of like another kind of similar scenario would be slightly more aggressive massing with more frequent mini cuts versus slower massing but less often mini cutting. Maybe you just end up in the same place, and we don't have enough data or evidence or whatever to necessarily know, and probably the same person could do both and get very similar results.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Is it would just be my assumption once again. That this is then the outcome.
So on your end, are you mini cutting now? Has that started?
Yes, I started the mini cut like last week. First day, easy peasy, to be honest. Like a very easy ride. Simply because also I just needed to modify my diet slightly. Everything that I'm eating right now is also what I've been eating in a gaining phase. I just needed to cut out a couple of things. So for example, in the morning time, I had an additional banana, for example. That one is now out. And then also towards the end of the day, I always had 2 additional pieces of toast, for example. These are out now as well. So easy ways of cutting calories without then feeling overly hungry and all that kind of stuff, right? And this way, I'm already cutting kind of 7 up to 1,000 calories out of my day quite easily without feeling the impact of it, because the sheer size of the food that I'm eating is nearly still the same, frequency still the same, taste-wise, flavor-wise, still the same. So that's why it's actually fairly easy. It's a little bit inconvenient because it's just nice to have more palatable things in your diet. That's the only thing, right? It's just an inconvenience because I like eating in general. I know that you're sometimes at the point where you don't really like to eat, but I'm so far away from that when it comes to the sheer amount of food that I don't have any kind of issues with that. So all it is right now is just a minor inconvenience that I would like to eat more, but it's just because I like to eat more. Not because I'm hungry, not because I'm super lethargic and all that kind of stuff. But I can immediately tell in the mirror that and also in the gym, immediately getting flatter, right? So especially also the veins. It was a little bit colder over the past couple of days here in Berlin, but the veins nearly disappearing. And you would assume like, have I gotten fat or what is it, right? You would expect, because you're now leaning out, that they are even more so visible. But here in the first initial weeks, they are just disappearing. And that makes you then sometimes question yourself of like, what's going on right now and stuff like this. But that's the situation around the diet, and also what I'm doing in a mini cut. And this is just my personal opinion, is I'm even cutting out a little bit of training volume. Reason being is that I'm not convinced that you are gaining a lot of muscle mass in a mini cut anyway. And in a gaining phase, you really want to try to push the limits and see how much you can do and still recover from it, and it feeling productive in a session. That doesn't mean, though, that this is what you should be doing in a mini cut, because if you're not expecting to gain a lot out of it, all we care about is preservation of muscle mass and fatigue management. And fatigue management is kind of equal to preservation of muscle mass, because if you're taking care of your fatigue, then you are able to perform well in the gym. And when you're performing well in the gym, you have a very high chance of preserving muscle mass. And that's why also this, in combination with the scientific evidence about what is required in order to maintain muscle mass, it just makes sense to me to reduce the volume ever so slightly, so that I have a little bit more capacity and resources to push through workouts in a productive manner and not crush myself too early on in the mini cut, because a mini cut should, of course, be quite aggressive when it comes to the deficit.
That makes a ton of sense to me. I'm definitely the same way in terms of like not having as high average volumes through it. And if I am adding sets in any sense through massing mesos, it's definitely not applied in the same way even to cutting, but especially mini cutting, like set volume is pretty static. And then in a mini cut, I'm also less pushy, just like each week. Like if I'm just way more happy just to maintain a decent performance from week one and not worry about needing to add a rep or small amount of load, and just like you said, just present a stimulus that I know is going to be holding muscle tissue. And in that way, it becomes way less stressful. I think when you approach a mini cut training like you're massing or like another cuts training, suddenly you're just, like you said, you hit a wall and you're like, hey man, I had a 5-week mini cut plan, maybe it's week 3 and I'm completely trashed from training. Yeah. I have to back off here and maybe start again.
And once again, for what? You're not expecting to gain a lot out of each and every single set that you're doing, right? From a hypertrophic perspective. So what it is that you want is to induce enough of a hypertrophic stimulus. Everything beyond that doesn't really add a lot of hypertrophy, probably more so fatigue, because when it comes to a cutting phase, it is more so skewed towards fatigue accumulation rather than hypertrophy accumulation, so to speak. And that's why it never really made sense to me in trying to keep the volume relatively high. It's not that I'm cutting my volume down significantly. It's just something, for example, when on that one chest day, I knew that I was able to recover from 8 sets for that session, right? And now I've cut it down to 6 or 7, something like this, right? Yeah. Not a significant change. And still, you're doing plenty of volume still.
And with your training, I know you went into this from a metabolite phase. Did you cut out the metabolite work as well, or are you still keeping that going?
No, I cut that one out. The thing is, though, what I have to say is that for the legs, due to my current situation with my especially left side, I need to now do higher repetition work on something like leg extensions, leg press, for example. While I was already more convinced that, especially for the leg press, it's better to be in a medium to high repetition range, now I'm really pushing the envelope all the way up to 20 repetitions. And yeah, it is awful. But at the same time, I have the feeling that it's a little bit better for my connective tissue and joints. And I was actually seeing a doctor here this week. It was yesterday, and we did an x-ray. No, 2 days ago, I think it was. We even did an x-ray because I was complaining about knee issues. And this is something that I have since a long time. I even talked about it with Mike. So Mike Challis, our physio, like a year ago when I was visiting London. And it still hasn't gotten better. And I would assume that it still has to do with the IT band, because it is kind of basically on the lateral part of my knee where the pain is persistently. And there's also a trigger point where I push on the lateral part of my hip with my knee. And then I feel the exact same stinging pain in the lateral part of my knee. So the doctor was a new one. I have never really been to that orthopedic before. We did an x-ray of my hip this time because he was assuming that it stems from the hip, which makes a little bit of sense to me, but at the same time, and I'm not a professional by any means, and I don't want to be the guy who questions the integrity and credibility of a doctor, and I'm not. It's just that it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me that the lateral part of my knee stems from the hip issue of my femoral acetabular impingement. So that is in my hip socket, because if I push that trigger point on the lateral part of my knee, that I'm then experiencing this on the lateral part of my knee is more an indication for me, perhaps that, and also when I'm massaging my left leg, it is so painful and so tight in comparison to my right side, for example, that I think it is maybe some soft tissue stuff and maybe a little bit of a mobility stuff, because maybe things have tightened up so much that I'm just compensating with some body part of mine, and that's why it always aggravates there on the outside of my knee. The unfortunate thing is, because it hasn't been the doctor who did surgery on my knee, on my hip, sorry for that, it is hard for him to interpret how my hip looked like before. And this is where I would love that doctors are more so interconnected with I don't know, a database for each and every patient where all of my previous results are kind of collected in a cloud, so to speak. And he doesn't have access to it. And that's why he doesn't know what my hip looked like after the surgery. And I don't have the data as well. So
that's annoying.
Yeah. And sorry for the ramble here, Steve. I just want to give you a little bit more context, of course. And when he looked at the x-ray, he basically also said what was quite apparent and also quite obvious to me, what other doctors have said in the past, that at some point I will have an artificial hip. And hearing this once again wasn't really great, to be honest, because he said that just based on the x-ray, he thinks that in the next 10 years I will have to get a hip replacement. And that is, of course, not the nicest thing to hear.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
And I think here in the UK with the NHS, we do have that centralized like database for each person. At least that's the way I feel when I've been to the GP and they look on the system and they can see my history there. But again, I don't know if I went privately for something, if that would also be on there or what have you. But yeah, I don't even know what the implications for a hip replacement. I don't know if bodybuilders who have had hip replacements, I don't know what that means for like future leg training or any of that actually.
I do remember the time back in 2016 when I underwent hip surgery for the first time, that I was looking up so much and it was very, very hard to find proper information on the internet because, of course, you're reading on, I don't know, forums and all that kind of stuff. And then you're reading on what is it?
MD?
MD.
WebMD, yeah.
Exactly. Things like these, right? And at some point, there is so many conflicting data that you don't even know how to go about it, how to interpret that. What's the latest technology even? Maybe artificial hips are now so good that you could be doing this, but what it is that you're finding online is already from 5 years or 7 years ago or something like this, right? So I don't know. And I don't know what it will be like in 5 to 10 years from now. But the concluding thoughts for me personally was just like, all right, the intervention now for the next years is, it's unquestionable that I need probably a hip replacement over the next, hopefully 10 to 20 years. But it will eventually come. Now it's just a matter of to buy time. Buy as much time as possible so that if I get one, that I only need to undergo this surgery once instead of twice. Because an artificial hip most of the time lasts like 20 years and then you need to change it.
Okay.
And that, of course, you want to avoid the older you get because it's such an invasive thing, especially when you're 80 years old. Holy fuck, right? Sorry for my language once again. And right now it's more about buying time. And at the same time, not just buying time, but then looking into what I can do to maybe fix the leg issue and hopefully make it better, because once again, I'm not 100% convinced that it comes from the inside of my hip, but that it may seem as if it's correlated, and maybe it is to some extent, but I hope that I can still treat it in a more conservative fashion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can't even think. It's nothing anyone wants to have to think about, but of course you want to prolong the time until that surgery might be necessary, especially like you said, who knows in a decade how advanced the technology will be. Maybe then you can get to a point where it's only needed once and then you're fine. But I guess at the moment, with the modifications you're making to training, like the higher rep ranges is where you're going to, and then I guess moving towards just lifts that are kind of pain-free and just prioritizing being pain-free. So if that means modifying movements more frequently or ranges of motion or any of those factors, you have to prioritize that over what on paper might be optimal for growing your quads or what have you.
That's exactly it. It is a hard pill to swallow, but at the same time, I'm now coming up to 36 years of age. That isn't really super old, especially not for hip replacement. Anyone who tells me, like, especially back in 2016, it's already ages ago now, 7 years ago, I was very young in comparison to now, especially considering hip replacement and also just getting surgery there. But it is what it is. I have to deal with it. I have to also deal with the potential consequences that come up in the future. And all I can do right now is try to, once again, buy some time and work around it as best as I can. And hopefully just prolong it for as long as possible. It's kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to compare it to that, but this is the only comparison that really comes to mind at the moment. But if you have a death sentence due to any kind of, I don't know, sickness, severe sickness, and the doctor tells you like, you have 6 more months to live before you're passing away. And you're trying everything, you're just changing everything about your lifestyle, and all of a sudden you're living for 3 years and still you're not passed away, right? This is the way that I can see it now. I would try my very best to work around it, to extend it for as long as possible. And who knows? Maybe I will be able to extend it, because the one thing that he also said is you want to have as much muscle mass as possible, because muscle tissue will help you put pressure away from connective tissue and joints. So this is your best bet in extending things.
That reminds me of I have a slap tear in my shoulder, and I was meant to have keyhole surgery for it. And obviously I haven't had that. And the only thing I can think is having built up the muscle around that joint has allowed me to circumvent needing it. So not that that's probably comparable, but it kind of is an example of what you're talking about there. And
I think that's a great comparison, Steve.
Yeah, hypertrophy. So what do people call it? Like forgiving in that sense. Like there's so many routes to hypertrophy. And so, yeah, I would stay positive as possible about it, but also not ignorant to pushing, like not thinking I'll have to train heavy or anything like that.
Yeah. Also on that note, I'm way more relaxed this time because first and foremost, I'm older. If I have to stop, then I have to stop of like lower body work. And I think that when I'm older, I can still do something probably. It is also very hard to find proper information because on certain sites you hear that you can't do anything, and then on certain other sites you can be back to basically doing normal activity in a matter of 1 year, except for high impact training such as, I don't know, rugby, football, something like this needs to be avoided, or jumping and all that kind of stuff. And also at the same time, I have Katie by my side. Back then in 2016, when I underwent first surgery, I was alone. I was single. It was awful because I needed to walk on crutches for like 8 weeks straight and still go shopping, I didn't have a car, right? So I needed to commute by public transportation to the physio, which was on the other side of town, and go to evening school in the midst of the winter on crutches and all that kind of stuff. It was awful. And nowadays I have Katie by my side, who would support me in any way that she can. And also I'm just working from at home. It would make things so much easier, to be honest, to go through something like this than it was back then. And also on top of it all, just to go back to the muscle mass thing, we know how important muscle mass is for aging. And so many injuries that occur when you are older is because of a lack of muscle mass. It's crazy, but it is, right? And also so much pain probably as well, due to you not having the skeletal muscle mass anymore to support the connective tissue, the frame, and to strengthen everything, puts just a lot of pressure on your entire system, or especially like in our instance, the connective tissue and the bones. And if you can avoid this and prevent this now, then of course I will continue doing this.
Yeah, and the bone density and everything, just so many benefits from having it there. I guess if I was to, do you feel like the FAI that you had was preventable in the past, or do you think it was inevitable for you? So if you were thinking someone else, I don't know, to talk to previous you, is there anything you would have said, hey, don't do this, and we can maybe avoid this hip issue in future?
Yes and no. So no in the sense that it wasn't really preventative. It is a genetic thing of my hip structure, but at the same time, it most of the time really flares up if you are putting those connective tissues or the joints and bones and ligaments into a range of motion that it doesn't really like. And you often also see FAI in ballet dancers and also people who are playing something like football, because they are under high impact or going to extreme ranges of motions that isn't really tailored for then their maybe also shoulder socket or then their hip socket or hip bones. And so it was kind of preventative or preventable in a short term, but over the long term, I was probably very prone in getting a hip replacement or at least hip surgery anyway. That I got it that early was probably though due to the way that I've lifted in my early stages of my lifting career, because when looking back at my squats, for example, back then, man, they look awful. They do look so awful that I can feel my bones when I'm just watching those videos. That's what. And this is where I would love to go back in time and be like, man, you lift like shit. I know how I would have reacted. I would have been like, what do you even know? I'm powerlifting, right? But I would love to actually then have that chat and be like, hey, man, take a look at your form, right? And I would have loved that while you can hate on something like a full range of motion and all that kind of stuff, the information that you have nowadays on what proper technique is and what it may look like is much more prevalent than it was back then. And it does help people figuring out what a beautiful squat looks like in comparison to what it is that we had available, Steve, back in the days of like West Side Barbell, multiply style of squat, and you're trying to apply it without a multiply and you're not being made for it. And you're stubborn about it because that's the way that starting strength Mark Rippetoe says that you have to squat.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. With my slap tear, actually, as the example, that was definitely, like, there was no genetic trait that led to that happening. It was just me being an ego arsehole in the gym, not lifting sensibly, lifting with way too much weight. And I definitely didn't have eccentric control. I barely had any control of my like pressing. And unfortunately, I had the same mindset as I have now, where I'll push through anything and to my detriment. And because I didn't have full range of motion controlled technique, like imagine if you, like I see some of the guys that come up now, like the 15-year-olds who are just getting into the gym, and they're seeing maybe some of the stuff from Team Full ROM, and they're seeing how they're lifting, and then they've got a pristine technique. And I see them get bashed as like people are being like, are you using hardly any weight? Oh, baby weights, you're never going to grow. It's like, man, this guy is he's going to be way bigger than you and injury free in 10 years. Because, well, maybe he won't be because genetics and who knows what he's going to do. But things being equal, exactly. I so wish I'd started with that knowledge, because thankfully I have big joints and I'm pretty injury free and I'm like very resistant to it, but I wouldn't have this problem in my shoulder. I don't know what that would mean for other things, but I'm certainly only see it being a plus. So yeah, people are just getting into it are blessed with if they come across the right information. Yeah,
no, exactly. And this is also, I'm not impressed by huge weights anymore. And I know when I've started, I was massively impressed by all of those powerlifters. Dan Green comes to mind, for example. The Lillibridge brothers as well. Big, massive weights. It was amazing to watch. But now, and it's still impressive, don't get me wrong, absolutely impressive, right? But what really now gets to me is pristine form. When I see a beautifully performed, I don't know, for example, leg press, I'm just like, man, that's nice.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Cool. That's probably a good place to end it. I don't know. Did we leave on a high? Kind of. We gave some advice.
Yeah, kind of. It was like a more depressing episode this time.
Yeah, it was.
Talking about passing away, ending the career due to you getting a hip replacement at some point, all that kind of stuff. But in the end, I think it's also important to talk about it, because when is there ever someone like, for example, me, who's so fucked up from a physiological perspective, who's still around, who's still pushing through it, and who can share those experiences? Often you don't hear from these kind of things, or you have, of course, those powerlifters, but then at some point they're just disappearing from the surface because of a career-ending thing, you know? And I'm here to talk about it, and I won't go away, not anytime soon, at least, hopefully. I mean,
cancelled.
We all know what happened to Joe. But yeah, I will be around. I will still train my legs that's the unfortunate thing, Steve, because my legs were always my strong suit, and now
that's a good thing, though. Sure,
it kind of is. But knowing that I probably won't ever push them as hard as I would like to anymore. I mean, I can still train fairly hard, to be fair. It's just in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah.
Actually, on the note of technique and form, I've decided when I transition into this mini cut, I'm basically just going to, sometimes you just want to refresh. I'm just like, I'm not going to focus on where my loads were before on, say, the hack squat and try and like beat that performance. I'm going to kind of freshen up my technique. Be like, I want more eccentric control. I'm going to pause. Sometimes it's just refreshing to do that, especially as someone like when you're, this, Pascal, like once you've been lifting like over a decade, like hitting PRs and stuff, they come very rarely. Sometimes it's nice just to remove that kind of stressor that's like been like, no, you must progress this, and just be like, no, this is almost a different lift now and I'm going to focus more on that tension through the quads versus like lifting heavy loads and having to PR. And because I did feel like that was sending me down that risk of like the risk to reward just wasn't worth it. I'm like, why am I doing that? I'm actually too focused on paper what's happening versus the tension and stimulus that I'm generating, because that's actually what matters, not what theoretically like on paper matters.
Absolutely. And of course, we don't really want to drag this show on for too long, but that is exactly what I did, for example, now on the leg extensions and also the seated leg curls. Because, of course, a little bit had to do with the legs, but at the same time, I was just like using so much weight again that I thought that I had full control over. And to some extent, I would still assume that this was the case with leg extensions, but not so much with seated leg curls. And now I've significantly reduced the weight and it still feels amazing. I can still hit it and exhaust the muscle tissue. And in the end, that's all that you really want to do, right? Hit it in an appropriate repetition rate with the right intensity. And then in the end, the load on the barbell doesn't really matter as much, I would assume.
No, I made that infographic that was talking about like the jab, the left hook or whatever of a boxer to like get the knockout punch. It's not like trying to hit just as hard as possible. It's about the precision of that hit. And it's the same with lifting, where it's not about just the load on the bar. It's like, where are you placing that tension? How are you doing it? So I might reduce my load on the hack squat by 10%, but I might increase the stimulus through my quads by 10% by actually just executing the movement more specifically for the quads versus just to move the weight to A to B. Not that my technique was bad, but now and then these refreshers like you did, I think are a good idea.
No, totally. And I am looking forward to the update that you then have around this. Whether you're saying it was actually then turning out to be a waste of time, or whether you're saying, no, it was actually good.
It's always a lesson regardless.
It is. Cool. Then guys, thank you very much as always for tuning in. If you are interested in getting on other people, let us know in the comment section below. And then we are really considering bringing on someone, for example, also like Alex or someone else that you fancy in bringing on. Of course, we don't just want to bring on some random guy that we've never talked to. It would be lovely, such as Steve said, to have a little bit more of a chit chat going on. And if we never really had someone on, I don't think that we could actually do this, because at least I'm speaking for myself. I'm talking rubbish at times, as you guys may know by now, right? But I don't really feel that comfortable doing this when someone else I've never talked to is in front of me. I'm still having a slight sense of politeness then in me, that I'm not just giving them shit.
I agree with you. It's not fun talking to someone where you're just like, don't know, you just don't know, you're completely clueless to who they are. You have to have some sense of, maybe they in a sense also know who we are a little bit. Maybe they listen to the podcast now and then at least. So
and then they get off the podcast and think like, what the fuck was wrong with these people? They were dog shit crazy. I don't want this to happen.
I have a few people in mind that we could potentially reach out to if people are interested as well. So I'm sure you do too. So definitely let us know in the comments. Keep the comment section going. We appreciate every single comment there. And if you aren't subscribed, you better hit that subscribe button right now and like and do all that good stuff. We appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it?
It isn't though, it's reality and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.